I can't tell you how much I sympathize with the way everybody has had to endure this unbelievably testing and challenging
For
time.
the eighth time in nearly 4 decades, Princess Anne asked her brother to end it. End the influence. End the proximity. End Camilla. But this time, unlike the 7 silent warnings before Anne had proof, not whispers, not suspicions, but documented betrayal. Camilla's children quietly profiting from Queen Elizabeth's legacy, and even licensing Princess Diana's name abroad. And when Charles saw the contracts, he didn't argue. He trembled. What followed wasn't just a family rift, it was the quiet execution of a royal exile. 72% of Britons, according to a recent YouGov poll in April 2025, support the removal of Queen Camilla's family from royal privileges. The public outcry wasn't spontaneous. It was the direct result of a scandalous revelation. Camilla's children, Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles, had allegedly infiltrated the financial arteries of the monarchy, attempting to capitalize on the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II and even Princess Diana. And at the heart of this eruption stood 2 figures, calm but unyielding, Princess Anne and Prince William. For years, the British monarchy had balanced precariously between modernity and tradition. But something had shifted. The public grew uneasy. Whispers inside the palace grew louder. And when a confidential draft from the Duchy of Cornwall archives was leaked, the whispers turned to fury. The document, dated March 3rd, 2025, revealed that Laura Lopes Camilla's daughter was being positioned as a trustee for the Royal Estates Fund. Meanwhile, her brother, Tom Parker Bowles, had been operating a luxury banquet enterprise dubbed Royal Heritage Banquets, using royal trademarks and venues, particularly Sandringham Estate. To the world, these seemed like oversteps. To Princess Anne, they were a direct violation. Anne, long known for her discipline and loyalty to the crown, summoned her brother Charles behind closed doors. Her tone was unshaken. Her message was simple. The crown is not for sale. The influence of Camilla's family, once tolerated for peace, was now a clear and present threat to the institution their mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had spent a lifetime protecting. But Anne did not act alone. Prince William, equally disturbed, had compiled evidence. Emails between Laura and private wealth consultancy Rothborn and Partners hinted at long-term plans to restructure parts of the estate's commercial holdings. Financial trails linked Tom's banquet brand to offshore licensing deals that subtly leveraged the late Queen's image without formal authorization from the palace. Together, William and Anne issued an ultimatum to their father: either sever all official and unofficial ties between the monarchy and Camilla's children, or risk a public reckoning that could fracture the House of Windsor. The confrontation wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, dignified, and absolute. Charles, visibly shaken, listened as his 2 most trusted voices presented not only accusations, but undeniable proof. For a monarch who had spent decades fighting for Camilla's acceptance, the moment was devastating. "This is about legacy," Anne reportedly said, her eyes unwavering. "It's about blood. It's about what Mother built." Charles didn't respond at first, but his silence wasn't resisted. It was grief. Over the next few days, palace aides were seen coming and going from Clarence House. Legal advisors began reviewing trust protocols. Access to certain internal archives was quietly frozen. Laura and Tom, once occasional presences at royal events, vanished from the public eye. And Camilla, normally assertive and assured, retreated. She did not issue a public statement, nor did she confront the press. But behind the heavy doors of Clarence House, she reportedly wept. According to a senior royal staffer, she told Charles, "They want to erase my children, and now they want to erase me." But this wasn't erased. It was an extraction. What had begun as tolerated proximity had turned into encroachment. The distinction between Windsor and Parker Bowles had blurred, and the monarchy, facing declining trust and generational pressure, could no longer afford ambiguity. On April 12, 2025, a confidential meeting was held at Buckingham Palace. Attendees included the King, Princess Anne, Prince William, and key members of the Privy Council. The mood was clinical. The verdict: a royal decree would be drafted to redefine access, roles, and rights. The final blow came with ink. The document, formally titled Royal Asset and Legacy Safeguard Order, removed Camilla's family from all financial, advisory, and ceremonial roles. It excluded them from future trust oversight, estate consultations, and any branding privileges tied to the royal household. It made clear that only bloodline successors of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip would hold legitimate stewardship moving forward. To the public, this would not be released immediately. The palace needed time to prepare, time to frame, and time to let Camilla disappear from center stage. But to those within the walls of Windsor, the battle was already over. The Queen Consort had become a ghost, and for the first time in his reign, Charles stood not as a husband, but as a monarch forced to choose between love and legacy. The fracture was sealed, but what would come next would redefine the royal family for a generation. In the quiet halls of Clarence House, the silence was no longer ceremonial, it was suffocating. Queen Camilla, once confident and composed, had become a figure of solitude. The fallout from the decree had not only stripped her children of power, it had stripped her of position. Though she remained Queen Consort by title, her reality had shifted. She was now a relic of a compromise the monarchy could no longer afford. The formal removal of Laura Lopes and Tom Parker Bowles from royal functions did not spark immediate headlines. It was deliberately slow, almost surgical. Invitations ceased. Access passes were revoked. Security protocols were updated. No formal announcement had to be made. Absence was the declaration. Behind closed doors, however, emotions raged. Camilla felt betrayed, not just by the institution she had supported, but by Charles himself. According to multiple insiders, their conversations grew terse. He no longer called her into strategy briefings, no more weekend retreats to Sandringham. Their public appearances became robotic, mere performances of unity. Meanwhile, William and Anne did not bask in victory. Their mission had been brutal, but necessary. For them, this was not personal vengeance, it was purification. Their allegiance was to the crown and to their late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, whose image had been licensed without permission for a range of luxury merchandise, silk scarves, vintage wine collections, and even a designer fragrance line titled Legacy. These products trace back to business entities co-owned by Tom Parker Bowles and a shadow partner at Reading and Hume Limited, were being sold in boutiques across Europe and discreetly online through royal-themed e-commerce fronts. One internal audit, commissioned by William, revealed over £4.3 million in gross profit since late 2023, all without a single clearance from the Crown estate. For Anne, the final straw came when she learned that a commemorative tea set bearing her mother's silhouette marketed as the Queen's Farewell Edition had been produced in limited numbers and auctioned at a private estate gala in Vienna. The set, presented as endorsed by Windsor Legacy, had no such endorsement. "This is not just theft," Anne reportedly told the Privy Council. "It is desecration." The consequences were now spilling into the outer court. Several senior royal advisors were summoned to clarify how such ventures went unnoticed. A quiet purge began. Contracts were reviewed. Camilla's long-trusted personal secretary, Marina Fielding, was reassigned. The royal household finance director was placed on indefinite leave. Even King Charles, emotionally bruised, realized the scope of the damage. During a private discussion with Archbishop Langley, he confessed, "I brought them in, and I let them grow roots." Public sentiment, however, was not so introspective. The moment the Daily Telegraph published the leaked audit summary, public backlash ignited. Protesters gathered at Windsor, holding signs reading, "Legacy is not for sale," and "Protect Diana's memory." On social media, the hashtag number #NotMyQueen trended for 72 hours across Britain and Canada. Petitions circulated demanding that Camilla step away from public duties entirely. Even Commonwealth allies, usually silent, began to murmur. Australia's Prime Minister issued a carefully worded statement. The monarchy must lead by example, not by entitlement. Amid this chaos, Prince William took control of the public narrative. In a rare direct video address, he stated, "My grandmother gave her life to this nation. Her memory must be guarded, not commodified. What we protect today is not simply history, it's the honor of our lineage." The video was viewed 18 million times within 24 hours. It was a turning point. Within days, Buckingham Palace issued a follow-up statement clarifying that no member of the royal family outside the direct line of succession would be permitted to participate in any monetized branding initiative tied to royal heritage. The message was clear. Bloodlines mattered. Proximity was no longer enough. Camilla, sensing her position slipping, retreated fully to Raymill House. There, she began issuing private apologies to those caught in the storm: friends, staff, distant relatives, but the calls she made were not returned. Not from Anne, not from William, not even from Charles in the final weeks of April. According to royal historian Dr. Elaine Hartridge, this is the first time in modern monarchy where a consort was publicly untouched but privately erased. Camilla had not been removed, but she had been rendered irrelevant. And yet, beneath the surface, whispers continued. Was this the end of the upheaval or the beginning of something deeper? By early May 2025, Queen Camilla had effectively vanished from public life. Her name was still on the royal website, Her official portrait still hung in galleries, but inside Buckingham Palace, her presence was a ghost. No royal engagements, no charity appearances, no press interviews. It was as if the crown had placed her behind glass, visible, but no longer touched. The queen consort had become the monarchy's most elegant omission. Within the palace walls, staff avoided speaking her name. Her former ladies-in-waiting were reassigned. Her personal monogram, once embossed on correspondence, was now replaced with the royal crest alone. Events she once hosted, such as the Spring Garden Tea and the Summer Literacy Luncheon, were quietly absorbed into Queen Catherine's portfolio. Even her personal chefs had been transferred to Windsor, but the true shift wasn't procedural. It was emotional. King Charles, shaken and burdened, had withdrawn as well. According to courtier memos, he spent long hours alone in the royal study, often revisiting private journals of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. One footman described the atmosphere as perpetual twilight, a kingdom caught between obligation and grief. Charles's silence was interpreted differently by each faction. For supporters of Anne and William, it was the silent admission of guilt and the burden of justice. For Camilla's dwindling allies, it was abandonment. Meanwhile, inside Ray Mill House, Camilla walked her gardens alone. Reports from local staff confirmed her days had become quiet and repetitive. Morning tea at 7, gardening until 11, reading newspapers obsessively until lunch. Letters remained unopened. Dozens of sympathy cards arrived from aristocratic friends, but she replied to none. Her mobile remained off most days. Her only constant companion, a liver spaniel named Dottie, and yet, not all silence meant surrender. Deep within the archives of the Duchy of Lancaster, an investigator appointed by the Crown unearthed a second set of documents, communications between Tom Parker Bowles and senior partners at Merchanton Holdings, a Luxembourg-based holding group known for discreet acquisitions. These exchanges referenced intellectual property licensing for legacy-driven culinary experiences tied to Windsor motifs and Princess Diana's childhood recipes. The name Diana had never been commercially authorized. This revelation struck like lightning. For Prince William, this was sacrilege. To see his mother's memory co-opted by a family with no blood claim ignited a fury rarely seen. According to sources close to Kensington Palace, he reportedly told his private secretary, "That name is sacred," and they treated it like a menu item. William demanded an emergency Privy Council session. Within 48 hours, palace communications were updated. A new protocol was enacted. No royal names, living or deceased, could be used in association with commercial ventures unless explicitly authorized by the reigning monarch and the direct blood heirs. All existing ventures were frozen pending legal review. Public reaction was swift. Tabloids erupted. The Daily Mail ran the headline, "Diana's name for sale?" The Guardian questioned the opaque nature of royal-adjacent commercial structures. On social media, number Defend Diana trended globally, with celebrities, historians, and even parliament members weighing in. Lady Penelope Rathmore, a lifelong friend of the late princess, gave a rare televised interview. Diana gave her image to the people, not to brands. To see her name misused is not just wrong, it's heartbreaking. The outrage had reached a level that could no longer be managed quietly. And yet, Camilla remained silent. Was it guilt? Was it a strategy? Or was it a calculated retreat to outlast the storm? Inside the palace, the question haunted Charles. In a private exchange with Princess Anne, overheard by staff, he reportedly muttered, "They'll never forgive her. Not for this." Anne did not answer. She simply walked away. The family was no longer divided. It was dismantled. The press dubbed it the silent fall. No resignation, no scandalous confrontation, just a slow, methodical erasure. And in the vacuum left behind, William and Anne stepped forward not as rebels, but as restorers. One palace insider described the dynamic as the most quiet coup in modern royal history. At a state dinner hosted in Scotland, Princess Anne delivered a toast honoring Queen Elizabeth's values of duty over comfort, blood over convenience, and legacy over ambition. The message was thinly veiled, but crystal clear. The hall rose in thunderous applause. Camilla watched the clip from Ray Mill House alone. She turned off the TV, placed it on mute, and stared at her reflection in the black screen. A woman once at the center of power, now a silhouette. Her era was over, and yet a final chapter was still waiting in the wings. By the second week of May 2025, the balance of power within the British monarchy had shifted irreversibly. With Camilla in exile and Charles emotionally withdrawn, the stage was no longer shared, it was inherited. Prince William and Princess Anne, once cast in supporting roles, had assumed full control of the palace narrative. But their alliance was not forged in ambition, It was forged in fire. The public called it the Iron Alliance. Anne, the monarchy's unshakable compass, and William, the heir born under the shadow of tragedy, had become the architects of a new Windsor era, one defined not by pageantry but by principle. Inside the walls of St. James's Palace, meetings once chaired by Charles were now quietly led by Anne. At Kensington, William initiated a sweeping review of all royal charitable trusts, looking for signs of commercial interference, unauthorized branding, or offshore involvement. What began as a purge had evolved into an audit of purpose. William and Anne's first major move was to reconstitute the Royal Legacy Committee, a once ceremonial body now given real power. Its revised mandate: protect the moral and financial sanctity of Queen Elizabeth II's and Princess Diana's public image, and ensure all royal engagements aligned with their original ethos of service. Their second move was bolder. They opened the Royal Archives. For the first time in modern history, the public was granted limited access to a curated digital vault of royal correspondence, historic financial disclosures, and philanthropic records. It was an unprecedented act of transparency. William called it a window into the values we were raised on. But behind the scenes, this transparency was a tactical strike. Among the records published were details that clarified years of rumors: Camilla's influence over the placement of friends into ceremonial roles, her children's proximity to commercial ventures, the casual bending of protocol that had grown unnoticed during Charles's early reign. It wasn't scandalous, it was systemic, and it justified every decision Anne and William had made. Inside the House of Lords, the response was mixed. Traditionalists balked at the break from royal discretion, while modernists praised the transparency. In Australia and New Zealand, Republican movements paused their campaigns, citing a renewed sense of institutional integrity. At Balmoral, Anne summoned a private roundtable of senior Windsors, the Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Beatrice, and Zara Tindall among them. The message, unity is now non-negotiable. This is not about revenge, Anne reportedly said. It's about survival. Charles did not attend. Instead, he remained at Highgrove, where he was visited by only a handful of aides. His health had not deteriorated physically, but insiders noted he had lost weight, appeared fatigued, and spent hours rereading speeches written by his mother. One staff member recalled seeing him alone in the chapel, clutching her prayer book. Yet no one dared say what they all feared: that the king had abdicated in spirit, if not in form. Meanwhile, Camilla remained locked in her self-imposed exile. The only correspondence she received was a single note from Charles, handwritten, folded neatly, and delivered without seal. Its contents were never disclosed, but a close friend of the family confided it. Read, "I chose duty. Forgive me." She never replied. Elsewhere, the press was awash in what it called the Restoration. Poll numbers soared. William's favorability reached 82%. Anne was dubbed the Windsor Sentinel by the Times. Even Queen Catherine, though quiet, was seen as the embodiment of poised continuity. The public, exhausted by years of spectacle, had found new faith in structure. Yet, with every reform, a new question emerged. How far would this go? Some speculated that the Iron Alliance would propose constitutional updates to permanently bar non-bloodline individuals from receiving any level of trust control, branding rights, or ceremonial authority. Others whispered of a future where even royal marriages would require parliamentary review. Extreme? Perhaps. But the wound left by Camilla's missteps had hardened into resolve. And still, not a word from her. Not a rebuttal, not a press statement, not even a leak. Royal biographer Imogen Fieldstone commented on BBC Newsnight, "Camilla's silence is not grace, it's strategy. She's waiting, but she may not understand that the Windsor machine has already moved on." And it had. With startling speed, by late May, a newly commissioned Windsor Code of Ethics was ratified by the Royal Advisory Council. It formalized what had once been understood, that royal duty was a privilege bound to history, not a platform for influence. Every working member of the royal family would now sign an annual statement of compliance, including the monarch. It was Anne's idea. William approved it within the hour. The monarchy was no longer an inheritance of comfort. It was a mantle of rules. And for those who once treated it as negotiable, the doors were closing. The early days of June 2025 brought an eerie calm to the royal landscape, less a return to peace, more a breath held in suspense. The storm had passed, but the cracks it left behind were now baked into the very stones of Buckingham Palace. Queen Camilla's absence, though never officially addressed, had become institutionalized. Her name was no longer uttered at official events. She was neither seen nor expected. And yet, her shadow lingered like a bruise beneath royal protocol. But silence is not closure. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted for King Charles to clarify the monarchy's position not just on Camilla, but on the broader matter of royal succession, ceremonial roles, and the future shape of the crown. Parliament was asking questions. Commonwealth leaders whispered of contingencies. Even loyalists in the Church of England hinted at a shift in divine perception. Would Charles finish the reign he had waited a lifetime to begin? Or was history writing his epilogue before he could? It was Princess Anne who made the first move. At a closed-door assembly of the Royal Advisory Council, Anne proposed a constitutional recommendation that the monarch delegate expanded ceremonial authority to the Prince of Wales. It was framed as lightening the sovereign's burden, but everyone in the room knew what it meant. It was the first formal step toward transition. Charles did not oppose it. Instead, he requested 3 days. During that time, he secluded himself at Sandringham, walking the rose gardens alone, rereading handwritten letters from his mother. Staff reported that he spent long nights awake, lights on in the study, revisiting speeches he never gave. On the 3rd day, he returned to London. He walked into the council chamber, nodded once, and simply said, "So be it." Oh, and the very next week, on June 10th, 2025, what would have been Prince Philip's 104th birthday, the Royal Transition Act was quietly introduced in Parliament. Though largely symbolic in its first phase, it legally empowered the Prince of Wales to preside over all public ceremonies, foreign visits, and national addresses. In effect, William was now the acting monarch in all but name. The Iron Alliance had succeeded. And yet, no one celebrated. Camilla remained at Ray Mill House, a ghost in her own legacy. Rumors swirled that she might release a memoir, perhaps sit for a tell-all interview. But nothing came. Not even a whisper. Her silence, once seen as calculated, was now read as resignation. One former courtier described her as fading into myth present only in footnotes. But history has no room for unresolved endings. On June 15th, a confidential letter was leaked to the press. Written by Camilla to Charles just weeks earlier, it was raw and unguarded. "You chose them. I understand now. I will not return, not because I am uninvited, but because I no longer belong. My love for you is real, but so is my exile. Tell them nothing. Let me disappear with dignity." The letter shook the nation. For the first time, Camilla's voice was heard not in scandal, but in sorrow. Public reaction was split. Some sympathized. Others accused her of playing victim. But the consensus was clear. The era of Queen Camilla had officially ended. And in her absence, the royal family moved swiftly. Queen Catherine was quietly installed as patron of several charities previously under Camilla's name. The annual Royal Garden Party was rebranded as the Queen's Summer Assembly, marking Catherine's first solo hosting of a major ceremonial event. She wore pale blue, echoing a dress Diana once wore at the same garden decades earlier. It was not subtle. It was a signal. William, now leading state visits, delivered a speech at the United Nations headquarters in New York. His tone was assertive, his presence unshakable. Journalists remarked that he sounded like a king because he was. Anne, in parallel, resumed military inspections across the Commonwealth, reinforcing her role as the Iron Regent. In her interviews, she avoided discussion of Camilla entirely. But in one candid moment, she told the Times, "There are things one does not say not because they are false, but because they no longer matter." The monarchy had turned a page, but not all wounds had healed. At Clarence House, portraits of Charles and Camilla still hung in quiet corners, untouched but uncelebrated. Staff moved through rooms like caretakers in a museum of recent history. The Queen's former dressing room had been locked, its contents preserved. A gilded box of handwritten letters from Charles remained sealed on the vanity. No one dared move it. Royal historians began calling the events of spring 2025 the quiet restructuring. It lacked the fireworks of abdication or scandal, but it had achieved what no rebellion ever could: a bloodless transition, architected by loyalty and enforced by silence. And in that silence, a new monarchy was taking shape. William, Catherine, Anne, George, Charlotte, the names are now carved into the foundation of the next royal age. Charles remained king, but the future no longer waited for his consent. It had already begun. The end didn't come with a coronation. There was no grand proclamation, no velvet-draped fanfare. Just a quiet ripple that swept through the foundations of the monarchy, a whisper carried through marble corridors, across distant Commonwealth embassies, and into the hearts of a public long tired of spectacle. By July 2025, the transition was complete, without abdication, without scandal. And yet, to all watching, the truth was undeniable. King Charles had faded into ceremonial shadow, and William, Anne, and Catherine had become the living faces of a monarchy reborn. Public approval soared. A Gallup UK poll released on July 5th recorded the highest confidence in the monarchy since 1997. William stood at 84% favorability, Anne at 79%, and Catherine at a staggering 88%. More importantly, the under 40 demographic, once apathetic toward royal matters, had begun tuning back in. They weren't just watching, they were approving. One headline from The Guardian read, "The monarchy didn't reinvent itself. It returned to what it was supposed to be." Camilla was never mentioned, not by name, not in context, not even in rumors. She had become an erased presence. The only lingering trace of her influence came in the form of a quiet editorial by royal commentator Sir Roland Farley, titled "The Cost of Proximity." He wrote, "Power is not inherited through affection. It is inherited through principle." That was the lesson of 2025. Inside palace strategy rooms, the term succession architecture became the buzzword of the decade. Anne, ever methodical, led a task force to define the roles of every bloodline Windsor for the next 2 generations. William focused on the modernization of royal diplomacy. Under his guidance, foreign policy speeches shifted tone from tradition to pragmatism. Sustainability, humanitarian alliances, and digital ethics replaced pageantry and platitudes. Catherine, meanwhile, became the face of legacy. Her rebranding of the Queen's Trust into the Crown Initiative, a global education and wellness fund, was lauded as a masterstroke in soft power. In 1 year alone, the initiative raised over £65 million, partnering with over 100 countries. The monarchy was no longer an institution trapped in velvet. It was a living system. Charlotte and George were slowly introduced into public duties. George attended his first solo engagement, a youth climate summit in Oslo, at just 12. Charlotte delivered a poem in memory of Queen Elizabeth II during the remembrance ceremony. No press was invited, but the royal social media accounts posted clips. The comments flooded in. "This is the future we wanted. No scandals, just service. The crown feels human again." But none of it came easy. Behind closed doors, wounds still festered. Charles had not resumed public engagements. He remained mostly in seclusion at Balmoral, surrounded by books, paintings, and silence. Though he issued brief statements, approvals, condolences, acknowledgments, they lacked weight. They were signatures, not leadership. Camilla was never seen again. Ray Mill House was reportedly put up for sale. A trusted aide confirmed she had moved to a private estate in southern France. Some whispered of illness. Others said she had found peace. But no source could confirm. She was gone, not disgraced, not exiled, just gone. In a quiet moment at Kensington Palace, on what would have been Diana's 64th birthday, William stood with George and Charlotte beneath the statue erected in her honor. No media, no speeches. Just 3 generations, one memory. Later that day, the official royal family account posted a simple image: a white rose on a stone bench. No caption, no hashtags. It trended worldwide. Anne, in a private journal later donated to the Royal Archives, wrote, "Some things cannot be corrected, only carried, but carrying makes us strong." And so they carried on. On July 30th, in a rare joint statement, William and Anne addressed the nation. "What we restore is not perfection, but direction. What we preserve is not power, but purpose. The crown is not a symbol of privilege. It is a responsibility passed from hand to hand, from heart to heart." The speech lasted only 5 minutes, but its impact would last for decades. Newspapers called it the Quiet Ascension. Biographers dubbed the events of 2025 the 4th Reformation of the British monarchy. Scholars debated whether Camilla's downfall was a tragedy or a necessity. But the public? They had already chosen. They moved on. The monarchy, too, moved on older, wiser, leaner. Not through force, not through fanfare, but through the willful, strategic silence of those who understood that sometimes preserving the future means erasing part of the present. And in that silence, a new crown was forged, not from gold, but from principle.